Lolita, a butterfly in a net can still be beautiful. Lolita, published in 1955, written by Vladimir Nabokov. It is a tragic comedy. You could call it maybe a family drama, but not really. Drama should be in there though, and kind of just a general fiction classic. Those are the genres I would put it in. It's challenging, floral, building, lollygagging, charming, and conflicting. No spoilers, by the way. I won't give you any spoilers. But I am going to talk a little bit about it. And I'm going to read the review that I had written when I had first finished it. It's short, but I'll give you that. One thing I'll let you know is what's on the back here. Is that Lolita is a comedy, subversive yet divine, and it says it is savage humor. Both of those things talk about how it could be funny. I mean, humor and comedy should be funny by nature. It doesn't mean that they can't approach serious subjects or use serious subjects as the vehicle to tell jokes or things like that. But when I hear comedy and I hear humor, I think of this as supposed to be somewhat funny. So keep that in mind as people who are critics that are much more renowned than I have called it, because I struggled with that. I struggled with that attachment of funny to this. But I will read you what I had written after I had read it I don't even know when, 7-8 months ago. Lolita was described as having savage humor. It's a slow starter, but eventually picks up pace until things spiral out of control and we reach a disturbing climax. The plot at times feels like it's a satire, but of what? And comedy of errors and coincidence. Yet the subject matter is serious and is tempted to be undermined by two things: the absurdity of how things happen and the poetics. The diction in this book is pure romanticism, an abuse of adjectives. Things are described so beautifully with flowery language that it's easy to get lost. Everything is so purposeful and delicate and executed without much a misstep. The language is coupled with the circumstance in such a perfect marriage that they both rely on each other completely. The style of prose and the plot are so inseparable that it makes the book art, and the novel can be appreciated as such even without asking the reader to ponder anything further. Yet it does challenge the audience to analyze their morals and someone else's actions in such a way that it's visceral despite the artistic distractions. I've never read anything like it before, not just in plot, but in style. A beautiful yet challenging read with plenty of room for conscious thought. And it seems like I had a Freudian slip there, because I said tragic. And I did mention that this is somewhat of possibly a drama. Someone else described it as a tragic comedy. So, I feel like by giving you a little more information than I normally would in the summary, it's not going to ruin much. I still maintain there's no spoilers, because Lolita is such a cultural touchstone that I knew this much about it before I really knew about it, and before I even owned a copy of it, and before I read it. Before I talked to anyone else about it that had read it, because I have one friend who has also read it, but just like growing up, like I kind of got a vibe and I knew a little bit what that meant. And also people ended up using the name Lolita as a slang for I guess young, I don't even want to say young women, girls, not adults, not yet women, that were aesthetically pleasing, and to use a very lowbrow phrase, jailbait. Except calling someone a Lolita was much more romantic and pretty, and it just didn't feel as dirty when someone said it, when they were describing, oh, she's such a Lolita. Whereas it just wasn't as crude. It was treated with more reverence. And I would say that is in line with this book. So, basically what we have here is a man who falls in love with preteen to like early teen girls, an adult man. And this is a story, I would say, about empathy and about challenging the reader to find empathy in a character that is two things. One, an unreliable narrator, and two, a despicable character. There are things that happen here, and even just that premise alone, you're thinking like, I'm not gonna connect with this guy, like, or maybe you are gonna think the opposite of that, but if you're thinking like, I can't connect with this guy, like, I'm not wired that way, I don't have that impulse or that feeling or that desire or attraction, and you might be disgusted by that attraction, which our character may or may not be able to control. I'm not talking about actions, I'm talking about attraction. Kind of goes with that. I didn't think it was going to get this serious, but I mean, of just being like, oh, like, I don't remember deciding my sexuality when I was a child. I don't remember making a decision that I was heterosexual. That whole notion of being born this way. And so, actions you can control, but things like taste buds, how much do you control your taste buds of various different kinds? So, this book is challenging in that aspect. In the concept, in the story, the plot, that is challenging already, of just being like, yo, there's this dude, and to be, if I want to be crude with it, like someone else might be like, there's this adult man, there's this old gross dude who likes little girls. You could just leave it right there. You don't have to say what happens or have the rest of the story, and that might turn a lot of people off right away. It was controversial for the time and still remains to be over 50 years later. Where are we now? Like 60, 70? No, not quite 70. 70 years later? 75 years later? 76 years later? Anyway, yeah, so it's still challenging. But the thing is that it's still a classic for a lot of reasons, and it's well read for a reason too. And it's not just the diction. The language is beautiful, but that's part of what makes it so compelling, is that you have this contrast, this juxtaposition of beautiful, flowery language, very decorative and poetic, and you have that in contrast to things that are happening that you may not have been accustomed to or wanting to read about, but it's done in a way that's very subtle. It's not done crudely. It's not done with aggression or violence in the writing, in the way that it's presented to the reader. But you could say that those acts and what happens in this book, and some of those things are things that you find despicable things and disgusting things. I don't feel like I'm doing a good job of representing this, because like the book itself would never, like the way things are put, would never be like, oh, that's gross. The way that it's written and presented to you, but that's part of the function of this. If you take the subject completely out of it and just focus on the diction, it's a beautiful book. And it still maintains that, because the concept in and of itself isn't just like, oh, this is a gross old man, let's hear his story. It's, can we find empathy with this dude? It doesn't ask you to do that outright, but it takes you on a journey of this story and tells you a little bit of his background, and then it sets things up. It's a story, it's a novel that does that. It's a little slow to start, like I mentioned, but it does pick up and it builds upon itself. With that first opening, when I talked about it being a butterfly in a net that can still be beautiful, I think that, one, Lolita is the butterfly in the net. We talk about the innocence of a child, and he obviously thinks she's aesthetically beautiful, but I'm going to sneeze, and I always keep the sneezes in. Bad timing. She's in the net. But if you were to take and catch a butterfly and keep it in a jar or keep it under the net or whatever, you would still be able to find beauty in it, despite the fact that it is not beautiful in its freedom. It is trapped. Its life no longer is necessarily beautiful, but the image of it is. And there's obviously a comment on power there as well, and struggle. And also, the person who's keeping that butterfly in captivity might also have some struggle. It might not be just like, ah, yes, I trapped a butterfly, ha 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 ha, that's it. They might have struggle with the fact that part of this butterfly's allure was its freedom and innocence and whatever, and now that's gone, but they want it. And so there is even that thrown in there. But our despicable main character here, Humbert, I mean, I think that in some ways he is also trapped by his desires, and also just by, for him, he might think the law, by his affections not necessarily being reciprocated the way that he would like, and by a bunch of other things. And I don't necessarily want to call him a butterfly, even though the way that he would write things is beautiful, or convey his story, but the story in and of itself and his actions may be quite ugly, right? And I think that even the reader is in a net here. The reader is put into a place of captivity, that if you were going to read this thing all the way through, you are conflicted with, you are confronted with this despicable character and his actions, and then not just the beautiful writing, but also the way that he sees Lolita. And I think that puts you in a space that if you had to finish reading it, if you read the whole thing, that you are held in captivity and a little bit stressed and maybe perhaps even anxious, because you don't know how you feel about him yet. You have a feeling, but you're still reading, so you haven't drawn a conclusion immediately. I think that is the importance of this book. I believe that it is an important book. I don't know if it would change your life, but I think that it will challenge you, and it is something that would be a discussion point with either yourself or another person, and would stretch your understanding, might stretch your zone of tolerance for people, or being empathetic, or just questioning things. It might make you understand yourself better and your boundaries and why you have them. And I think that is important. And I think that again, there's a reason why this book is still highly recommended and is very well read. I would say if you are a fan of that type of cerebral challenge, if you enjoy classics, and if your reading pathway is language, then for sure I think that you would enjoy this book. I place it on my shelf middle to high. There are things that could have been done better. Take the concept out of it, and the language is beautiful, but it is a little slow at times. It does, when I said lollygagging, it's just the playful way, which fits this book, of saying that it is just really slow sometimes. It could move along differently. The pacing of it may be purposeful, but I feel like it doesn't push me along the way that I would like it to. It doesn't make me doesn't make me turn away from the quality of the page, but there are times where passages are just so dragged out and so long that yes, I just want to get through them, and I want to know what actually happens next. So it is a little too decorative and flowery for me in its language at times. It could have been scaled back a bit there, and so I just feel like for that reason I can't have it high on the shelf, but it is close. It is mid-high on my shelf. Lolita.